Do you know that Cleopatra, the woman who ruled the most powerful civilization in the ancient world, the queen whose face has been painted 10,000 times and whose story has been told in every language on Earth, lived closer in time to the moon landing than she did to the building of the Great Pyramids of Giza? Let that land for a moment. When Cleopatra walked through the shadow of the pyramids, those pyramids were already 2,500 years old. They were as ancient to her as she is to us. The ancient world was not one thing. It was layers, civilization upon civilization, millennium upon millennium, and Cleopatra sat near the end of that long story, not the beginning. But the timeline is just the beginning of what history got wrong about Cleopatra, because the woman behind the myth, the real Cleopatra, the one who actually existed, was more extraordinary, more intelligent, and more politically brilliant than anything Hollywood or history class ever showed you.
The timeline that breaks your brain. Here is the timeline in plain numbers. The Great Pyramid of Giza was completed around 2560 BC. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC and died in 30 BC. The Apollo 11 moon landing was in 1969 AD. The gap between the completion of the Great Pyramid and Cleopatra's birth is approximately 2,500 years. The gap between Cleopatra's death and the moon landing is approximately 2,000 years. Cleopatra is closer to us than she is to the pyramids, by 500 years. This single fact reshapes everything we think we know about the ancient world. The Egypt of the pharaohs, the Egypt of the pyramids, the Egypt of the Great Golden Age. That was ancient history even in Cleopatra's time. She was not a pharaoh of the Pyramid Age. She was a Greek queen ruling in Egypt that was already a museum of its own past. And yet, she may have been the most capable ruler that Egypt ever had.
Who Cleopatra actually was. Cleopatra VII, to give her full title, was born in Alexandria in 69 BC into the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Greek royal family that had ruled Egypt since the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. The Ptolemies had been ruling Egypt for nearly 300 years by the time Cleopatra was born, and in all that time, none of them had ever bothered to learn the Egyptian language. Cleopatra did. She was, according to ancient sources, the first member of her dynasty to speak Egyptian fluently. She also spoke Greek, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Latin, and the languages of the Parthian and Median empires, 9 languages in total, according to some ancient accounts. In an age when the Mediterranean world was held together by personal diplomacy and direct communication, the ability to speak directly to any ambassador, any merchant, any subject without a translator was an extraordinary political advantage. She was not, as popular culture has consistently portrayed her, primarily a figure of seduction and romance. She was a politician, a diplomat, a military strategist, a scholar educated at the Museum of Alexandria, the greatest intellectual institution the ancient world had ever produced. She understood mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and economics. She administered an empire of 7 million people. She commanded armies and navies. She managed the complex politics of a kingdom caught between the 2 most powerful men in the Roman world. And she did all of this while fighting, from the very beginning of her reign, for her political survival.
The throne and the struggle. Cleopatra came to power at approximately 18 years old, ruling jointly with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII as required by Egyptian law, which prohibited a woman from ruling alone. Within 3 years, her brother's advisors had organized a coup and driven her into exile in Syria. Cleopatra was 21 years old, in exile with no army and no allies, and she began immediately planning her return. Her opportunity came in the form of Julius Caesar, who arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC, pursuing his rival Pompey. Caesar was the most powerful man in the Roman world. He controlled the armies and the politics of Rome. And Cleopatra, understanding immediately what his presence meant, had herself smuggled into the royal palace, according to the most famous account, rolled inside a carpet or a linen sack to meet him privately before her brother's supporters could prevent the encounter. Whether the carpet story is literally true or legendary embellishment, what is historically certain is the political result. Caesar and Cleopatra formed an alliance. Caesar's military support helped Cleopatra defeat her brother and reclaim the Egyptian throne. She was 21 years old. She had turned a coup and an exile into a political alliance with the ruler of Rome. This was not seduction, this was strategy of the highest order. Cleopatra recognized that Egypt's survival as an independent kingdom depended on its relationship with Rome, and she pursued that relationship with every tool available to her. Cleopatra and Rome. Caesar was assassinated in Rome in 44 BC, and the Roman world plunged into civil war between his supporters and his assassins. Cleopatra, who had traveled to Rome with Caesar and had borne him a son named Caesarion, returned to Egypt and waited, watching the Roman power struggle with the careful attention of a ruler whose kingdom's fate depended on its outcome. When Caesar's supporters, Mark Antony and Octavian, defeated the assassins at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, Cleopatra faced the same strategic problem again. Egypt's independence depended on maintaining a relationship with whoever controlled Rome, and the man who controlled the eastern half of the Roman world was Mark Antony. Cleopatra's meeting with Mark Antony at Tarsus in 41 BC is one of the most described events in ancient history. She arrived on a magnificent barge with purple sails and silver oars, attended by her court in elaborate theatrical display. The spectacle was deliberately calculated, a demonstration of Egyptian wealth and power, designed to establish that Cleopatra was not a supplicant, but an equal. What followed was a decade-long political and personal alliance that would eventually bring both of them to ruin. Antony and Cleopatra together controlled enormous resources, the wealth of Egypt combined with Antony's Roman legions. They made territorial grants to their children. They positioned themselves as the rulers of the Eastern Mediterranean world. But in Rome, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, was watching all of this with cold political calculation, and he was preparing.
The fall. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, a naval engagement off the coast of Greece where Octavian's forces met the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The battle ended in defeat for Antony and Cleopatra, and they both retreated to Alexandria. What happened next has been debated by historians for 2,000 years. Ancient accounts, most of them written by Romans who had every reason to portray Cleopatra as a manipulative foreigner, describe a chaotic final period in which Cleopatra attempted to negotiate with Octavian, while Antony, believing incorrectly that she had already surrendered and died, took his own life. Cleopatra survived Antony's death. She met with Octavian personally. The only surviving account of what was said comes from Octavian's own supporters and should be read with appropriate skepticism. What is clear is that Cleopatra understood what Octavian intended to do with her. She would be taken to Rome, displayed in his triumph as a conquered queen, and then executed or imprisoned for the rest of her life. She chose not to allow that. On August 12, 30 BC, Cleopatra VII, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the last independent ruler of ancient Egypt, died in Alexandria. She was 39 years old. Ancient sources describe death by snakebite, the asp being the traditional account. Modern historians have proposed alternative explanations. The exact method remains uncertain. What is certain is this: she chose the manner of her own death rather than allow Octavian to choose it for her. It was the last political act of a woman who had been making political decisions since she was 18 years old. What history got wrong?
Almost everything the popular imagination knows about Cleopatra comes from Roman sources written by her enemies, or from artistic and literary traditions that transformed her into a symbol of dangerous female sexuality, a cautionary tale about the hazards of powerful women. The real Cleopatra was not primarily defined by her relationships with Caesar and Antony. She was defined by 21 years of rule over one of the most complex and strategically important kingdoms in the ancient world. She kept Egypt independent for 20 years in the face of overwhelming Roman power. She managed internal religious politics, economic administration, and military strategies simultaneously. Ancient coins bearing her image show a strong-featured, sharp-nosed profile, nothing like the conventionally beautiful figures that paintings and films have substituted for her. She may not have been physically remarkable by conventional standards at all. What was remarkable about her, by every ancient account, was the force of her intelligence and personality. The ancient writer Plutarch described her voice as an instrument of many strings and said that her presence made any language she spoke sound native. She was the most powerful woman in the ancient world. She was also one of the most capable rulers of any gender in all of ancient history. And she has spent 2,000 years being remembered primarily for who she loved, rather than for what she built.
Cleopatra lived closer to the moon landing than to the building of the pyramids. She spoke 9 languages. She was the first ruler of her dynasty to speak Egyptian. She kept one of the greatest kingdoms in the ancient world independent for 21 years, and she chose the manner of her own death rather than be displayed as a trophy. She was not a symbol. She was a human being, brilliant, politically ruthless, deeply educated, and ultimately defeated not by her own failures, but by the overwhelming military power of Rome. History forgot what she actually was. We are only beginning to remember. If this changed how you see the ancient world, share this video with someone who needs to know. Subscribe to Ancient Curious and hit the notification bell so you never miss a fact that history forgot to tell you. New episodes every week. I will see you in the next one.